Humanity learned long ago that the cycle of violence only continues if someone doesn't choose to break it. We're choosing to break it now. 6 months had passed since the Fifth Conquest Fleet's destruction, and the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Valdran Empire, which had stood for 3,000 years, existed now only as scattered warlord states fighting over the scraps of their former glory. 2/3 of their conquered worlds had declared independence. The rest were caught in civil wars as various Valdran factions tried to maintain control. Admiral Hanna stood on the bridge of the TSDF Indomitable, humanity's first diplomatic flagship. Unlike the defensive platforms that had destroyed the Valdran fleet, this vessel was designed for peaceful engagement. It bristled with sensors and communication arrays rather than weapons, though the advanced defensive systems that protected it were no less impressive than those that guarded Earth. Approaching the Keltorian system, her navigation officer reported. "They're hailing us, Admiral." "On screen," Hanna ordered. The display showed a Keltorian female, her reptilian features arranged in what Hanna had learned was their expression of cautious hope. The Keltorians had been conquered by the Valdran 70 years ago and had spent decades under brutal occupation. Admiral Hanna of Earth, the Keltorian spoke in halting English, learned from the education programs humanity had broadcast across former Valdran space. "Welcome to Keltoria. We are honored by your arrival." "The honor is ours," Hanna replied warmly. "We bring medical supplies, fusion reactor components, and agricultural technology as discussed. We also bring our promise the Valdran will not return. Earth will ensure your freedom." Behind her ship, a convoy of cargo vessels carried aid for the newly freed world. Food, medicine, technology, everything a civilization recovering from occupation would need, and it was all free. No strings attached, no demands for payment or territory. This same scene was playing out across dozens of former Valdran worlds. Humanity had emerged from hiding not as conquerors but as liberators and helpers. It was a role that felt right to people who had spent 2 centuries preparing for war, but hoping for peace. On Earth, President Jiho sat in a meeting room with representatives from 43 different species. The Galactic Liberation Council, as it had come to be called, met weekly to coordinate the massive effort of rebuilding a shattered region of space. The former Valdran Emperor's faction is still holding 17 worlds hostage, reported Ambassador Kenji from the Turellian delegation. They're demanding recognition as the legitimate government in exchange for peaceful surrender. "Unacceptable," growled Representative Thakvor from Krath Prime. "They held my world in slavery for 200 years. We will not negotiate with them." President Jiho raised his hand for calm. "No one is suggesting we negotiate with war criminals. But we need to consider the civilian populations on those 17 worlds. They didn't choose to be caught in the middle of this conflict." "What do you suggest, President Jiho?" asked Ambassador Kenji. "A targeted intervention," Jiho replied. "We've done 3 already with good results. Quick, precise military action to remove the warlord leadership, followed immediately by humanitarian aid and support for local governance. The people on those worlds deserve freedom just as much as everyone else." The council debated for another hour before reaching consensus. Earth would lead a coalition force to liberate the 17 remaining worlds. Not conquer them, not occupy them, but free them and then leave, allowing the locals to determine their own future. This was the pattern humanity had established. Use overwhelming force when necessary, but only to remove threats, never to control or dominate. It was a radical approach to galactic power, and it was working. Dr. Sora sat in her laboratory on Research Station Olympus, now repurposed from military development to peaceful scientific advancement. Around her, scientists from a dozen different species worked together on projects that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Dr. Sora called out researcher Mako, a young human physicist. "The Keltorians just transmitted their findings on quantum field stabilization. It confirms your theory about dimensional resonance." Sora smiled, reviewing the data. This was what she had always hoped for. Cooperation instead of conflict, shared knowledge instead of hidden weapons development. Humanity was now sharing carefully selected technologies with allied species, helping them advance at their own pace while being careful not to overwhelm developing civilizations. "Excellent work," she said. "Add it to the database and make sure all our partner institutions have access. In the Sol system's outer reaches, Admiral Taiho commanded a very different kind of fleet. The Joint Species Security Force consisted of ships from 20 different worlds, including both human vessels and retrofitted Valdran ships now crewed by volunteers committed to peace rather than conquest. Their mission was hunting down Valdran war criminals, the worst of the old Empire's leadership who had committed atrocities across hundreds of worlds. It was difficult work both tactically and emotionally. Taiho had served the Valdran for years. He knew many of the criminals personally. Target located, reported Commander Hyuk from the sensor station. Former General Korvath wanted for genocide on 12 worlds. He's in the asteroid field trying to reach a hidden faster-than-light corridor. All ships intercept course, Taiho ordered. Standard protocol. Disable his ship and take him alive. He'll stand trial for his crimes. The operation took less than 10 minutes. Korvath's stolen cruiser was no match for the combined fleet's technology. He was captured without casualties on either side and immediately transported to the International Tribunal on Luna, where he would face justice for his actions. This, too, was part of the new galactic order. Justice, not revenge. Trials, not executions. Humanity insisted that even the worst criminals deserved fair treatment under law, and they backed up that insistence with the military power to enforce it. Captain Hana completed her diplomatic mission to Keltoria and prepared to move on to the next system. As her ship powered up its faster-than-light drive, she received a message from Earth. The content made her smile. The United Terran Council had just announced the creation of the Galactic Defense Network. Any species that wanted protection from aggression could join freely. Earth would provide the military backbone, but governance would be shared equally among all members. No species would dominate. No empire would rise to replace the Valdran. It was ambitious, perhaps impossibly so. But after watching humanity do the impossible by preparing for an alien invasion in secret for 2 centuries, Hana had learned not to bet against her species when they committed to something. In the detention facility, Krathfor sat in what had become his daily meeting with Lieutenant Yunji. Over the past 6 months, she had taught him about human history, ethics, and philosophy. At first he had resisted, clinging to his old beliefs about strength and conquest. But gradually, hearing about humanity's own brutal past and how they had overcome it, he began to understand. "You were like us once," he said during one session. "Your history is full of conquest and empire building." "Yes," Yunji admitted. "We were conquerors too. We enslaved each other, committed genocides, destroyed entire cultures. For thousands of years we repeated the same mistakes over and over." She looked at him seriously. "But we learned. We grew. We changed. And now we're trying to help others make that same journey without the centuries of suffering we endured." "Do you think I can change?" Krathfor asked quietly. "I think anyone can change if they want to," Yunji replied. "The question is whether you want to badly enough." Krathfor was silent for a long moment. "Then what would I do if I changed?" "I was a military commander. Conquest was my entire life." "We're going to need teachers," Yunji said. "People who understand military thinking, who know how conquest-minded species operate. You could help us identify potential threats before they become dangerous. You could teach young officers how to think like enemies so they can defend against them." She paused. "Or you could just live quietly somewhere, farming or painting or whatever brings you peace. The choice would be yours." It was a strange thought for someone who had spent his entire life following orders and giving them. The freedom to choose his own purpose was both terrifying and oddly appealing. On Earth, in the command center beneath the Swiss Alps, General Nari reviewed the latest strategic reports. The galaxy was stabilizing faster than anyone had predicted. The threat of renewed Valdran aggression was diminishing daily. Most of the warlord states were either surrendering peacefully or being removed by coalition forces with minimal casualties. "We might actually pull this off," said Colonel Young-ho, standing beside him at the main display. "Pull what off?" Nari asked. "Peace, real peace. A galaxy where species cooperate instead of conquer." Young-ho shook his head in wonder. 6 months ago, we were preparing to be invaded. Now we're building something that might actually last." Nari smiled slightly. "Don't get complacent. There will always be threats. Pirates, rogue states, new empires rising from species we haven't met yet. But yes, I think we've laid a foundation for something better." He pulled up a long-range sensor display showing Earth's defensive networks extending throughout the solar system and beyond. Humanity had built these weapons to protect themselves, but the detention facility existed in a space that shouldn't be possible. It was neither fully in normal reality nor completely in another dimension, but somewhere between. The walls looked solid enough, but sensors couldn't quite agree on where they were or what they were made of. To the Valdren prisoners inside, it felt like being trapped in a dream that refused to end. Krathvor sat on a simple bench in a cell far too small for his massive frame. The supreme commander of the 5th Conquest Fleet, the warrior who had never known defeat, had been reduced to a prisoner without even the dignity of a proper battle to mark his fall. His forearms hung limply at his sides. All 6 eyes stared at nothing. The door to his cell opened and a human walked in. She was small by Valdren standards, barely reaching Krathvor's chest with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. She carried a data tablet and wore a uniform that marked her as military, but she showed no fear standing before a being who could tear her apart with one hand. "Supreme Commander Krathvor," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Lieutenant Yunji, xenopsychology specialist with the Terran Defense Force. I'm here to help you understand what happened and answer any questions you might have." Krathvor looked at her with eyes full of broken pride. "You won. That's what happened. Your weapons destroyed us. What more is there to understand?" Yunji pulled up a chair and sat down, completely at ease despite being within arm's reach of a creature that had personally killed thousands of beings in combat. "Actually, Supreme Commander, I think there's quite a lot you don't understand. For instance, do you know why we won so easily? Your technology is superior," Krathvor said flatly. "That much is obvious. Superior, yes. But do you know why? Do you know how a species you thought was primitive managed to build weapons that treated your fleet like children's toys?" Yunji activated her tablet, projecting a holographic timeline into the air between them. "Let me tell you the story of humanity's real development." The timeline began 200 years in the past, showing Earth as it had been. Divided nations, primitive technology, first steps into space exploration. This was the Earth the Valdren scouts had detected through those ancient radio signals. "This was us when you first found us," Yunji explained. "Divided, weak, vulnerable. If you had attacked then, we would have been helpless. You would have conquered us in hours, just as you planned." Krathvor stared at the images of primitive spacecraft and crude nuclear weapons. "Then what changed?" "About 190 years ago, we detected your empire." Yunji zoomed the timeline forward, showing a massive radio telescope array picking up signals from deep space. "We weren't looking for threats. We were just listening, trying to understand if we were alone in the universe, and we found you." The hologram showed human scientists decoding transmissions, gradually piecing together the truth about the Valdren Empire. Conquest after conquest, species after species falling to overwhelming force, a pattern of expansion that was heading slowly but inevitably toward Earth's region of space. "We knew you were coming," Yunji continued. "Maybe not immediately, maybe not for decades or centuries, but eventually. And we knew we weren't ready." She looked directly at Krathvor. "So we made a choice. Every nation on Earth, every government, every people, we all chose the same thing: survival." The hologram showed something Krathvor had never seen in his 3,000 years of conquest: complete planetary unification. Every human nation putting aside their differences, pooling their resources, focusing on a single goal. "We created the United Terran Council," Yunji explained. "Not a world government exactly, but a coordination body with one mission: ensure that when you arrived, we would be ready. We unified our military, shared all our technology, and began the greatest research program in human history." The timeline accelerated, showing the explosion of human advancement. Quantum computing, nanotechnology, dimensional physics, faster than light travel. Technologies that should have taken thousands of years to develop were cracked in decades through focused effort and unlimited resources. "But we kept it secret," Yunji said. "We maintained our old satellites, our old spacecraft, our old weapon systems. We broadcast radio signals just like we always had. We wanted any potential threats to think we were still primitive, still weak, still easy prey." She smiled slightly. "We built our real civilization underground and in hidden dimensions. We prepared for the war we hoped would never come." Krathvor felt a chill run through his body. "You've been preparing for us for 2 centuries? Not just you specifically. Any threat. But yes, essentially." Yunji closed the timeline.
"Humanity has a saying: hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
We hoped you would never find us or that you would be peaceful if you did. But we prepared for you to be exactly what you turned out to be, conquerors who saw us as easy victims. The Supreme Commander sat in silence for a long moment. Finally he spoke, his voice hollow. My empire has conquered for 3,000 years. We have crushed civilizations that had technology far beyond what we found on Earth 2 centuries ago. How did you advance so far so quickly? Yunji considered the question carefully. There are several reasons. First, humans adapt very quickly. When faced with an existential threat, we innovate at speeds that frighten other species. Second, we had time to study the rest of the galaxy through our telescopes and radio receivers. We learned from everyone else's mistakes and successes. Third, we cooperated completely. Every human scientist, every engineer, every researcher worked together without the competition and conflict that slows down development. She paused, then added, but I think the real reason is something psychological. Humans are very good at imagining our own destruction. We spent thousands of years developing weapons to fight each other, always imagining worse and worse scenarios. When we finally unified and pointed that imagination outward, at potential alien threats, we built defenses against every nightmare we could conceive. Your fleet was powerful, Supreme Commander, but we had imagined far worse. In another part of the detention facility, Admiral Taiho walked through corridors filled with Valdran prisoners. He wore his old Terran uniform now, having officially resigned from Valdran service the moment the battle ended. Human guards nodded respectfully as he passed. They knew he had tried to warn his commanders, tried to prevent this disaster. He found who he was looking for in a conference room, General Nari, reviewing reports from the captured Valdran vessels. Admiral Taiho, Nari stood and offered his hand. It's good to have you home. Taiho shook the offered hand, feeling strange speaking Korean again after so many years. Thank you, General. Though I wish I had returned under better circumstances. You tried to warn them, Nari said simply. That's all anyone could ask. Taiho sat down heavily. What happens now? The Valdran Empire won't accept this defeat. They'll send more fleets, bigger fleets. Actually, Nari pulled up a holographic display showing real-time intelligence reports from Valdran space. The Empire is collapsing as we speak. We broadcast the entire battle across known space using quantum communication. Every species under Valdran control saw their so-called invincible fleet destroyed in 11 minutes by a species they had never heard of. The display showed dozens of worlds in open rebellion. Valdran garrison forces were being overwhelmed by uprisings. Supply lines were breaking down. The empire that had stood for 3 millennia was tearing itself apart. We didn't just defeat a fleet, Nari continued. We destroyed the myth of Valdran invincibility. Every conquered species now knows the empire can be beaten. The emperor himself has been overthrown by his own generals who are now fighting each other for control of what's left. Taiho watched the reports in amazement. You destroyed an entire empire in less than a day. We didn't destroy it, Nari corrected. We just showed everyone else that it could be destroyed. They're doing the rest themselves. He looked at Taiho seriously. The question now is what comes next. The galaxy is going to be very different in the coming years. Hundreds of species will be free for the first time in generations. They'll need help, guidance, protection from the Valdran remnants and from each other. And Earth wants to provide that help, Taiho asked. Earth wants to ensure this never happens again, Nari replied. We built these weapons to defend ourselves, but now that the galaxy knows we exist, we have a responsibility. We can't just hide anymore. In his cell, Krathvor listened as Lieutenant Yunji explained Earth's plans for the prisoners. They would be educated, offered rehabilitation, given the chance to learn why conquest was wrong. Those who accepted would eventually be repatriated to their own people. Those who refused would remain detained but comfortable and safe. We don't believe in punishment for its own sake, Yunji said. You followed orders from your leaders. You were raised in a culture that taught you conquest was right. We want to show you there's another way. Krathvor looked at this small human who spoke of mercy for beings who had tried to exterminate her species. Why, we would have killed you all. We know, Yunji said simply. But you failed, and now you're here helpless. What would we gain from cruelty? What would we prove by treating you the way you treated others? She stood to leave. The Valdran 5th Conquest Fleet unleashed everything they had. Every weapon on every ship fired at maximum power. Antimatter torpedoes, plasma beams, kinetic missiles, and fusion warheads filled the space between the fleet and Earth. with enough destructive force to shatter a dozen worlds. It was the most powerful single attack the Valdran Empire had ever launched. Krathvor stood on his bridge, watching the wave of destruction race toward the blue planet, and allowed himself a savage smile. No defense could withstand this. The humans would be vaporized, their cities turned to plasma, their resistance broken in a single overwhelming blow. The wave of weapons reached Earth's defensive sphere. And then, in the space of 0.3 of a second, everything changed. Dr. Sora sat in her laboratory aboard Research Station Olympus, watching the engagement through quantum sensors that could observe events at the subatomic level. She had spent 30 years developing humanity's defensive systems, and now she would see if her theories held true in actual combat. "Probability shields engaging," she said calmly into her recorder. "Target incoming weapons. Quantum state. Collapsed to null result." On the tactical displays, the Valdran weapons simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed by counterfire, not absorbed by shields, but removed from reality itself. The probability shields surrounding Earth operated on a principle the Valdran couldn't comprehend. They reached into the quantum foam of reality and decided that the weapons had never been fired at all. Physics itself bent to humanity's will, rewriting cause and effect on a scale that made gods look weak. Aboard the Dominance, chaos erupted. Sensor officers shouted conflicting reports. Weapons officers stared at their consoles in disbelief. Their entire attack had simply vanished into nothing. "What happened?" Krathvor roared. "Where did our weapons go?" "Supreme Commander, they just stopped existing." The sensor officer's voice trembled. "Our scanners show no explosions, no impacts, no energy dispersion. The weapons are simply gone." Krathvor slammed his fists on his throne. "Impossible. Nothing can do that." "Fire again! All ships, continuous bombardment." The fleet obeyed. Wave after wave of weapons launched toward Earth, each one vanishing the instant it entered the defensive sphere. The Valdran were pouring their arsenal into a void, achieving nothing but depleting their ammunition stores. Captain Hanna watched the futile attack continue for exactly 30 seconds. That was generous, she thought. Time to show them the difference between their technology and humanity's. "Activate offensive countermeasures," she ordered. "Singularity weapons first. Remove their command ship." Deep within the defensive sphere, weapons that had never been tested in combat powered up. These weren't crude missiles or energy beams. These were weapons built on principles that violated everything the Valdran knew about physics. On the Dominance, a warning alarm began screaming. The sensor officer looked up in horror. "Supreme Commander, massive energy spike detected directly in front of us. Distance, 0 meters. It's inside the ship." Krathvor barely had time to process those words before a microscopic black hole materialized in the center of his flagship's engineering section. It existed for exactly 1,000th of a second before being safely collapsed by its controlling field. But in that brief instant, it consumed the Dominance's main reactor, its faster-than-light drive, and half of its structural supports. The massive warship went dark, power dying across all systems. Emergency lights flickered on, but the ship was dead in space, drifting without power or propulsion. Across the Valdran fleet, captains watched in terror as their flagship died without a single visible weapon being fired. Then the next wave of Earth's counterattack began. Chronological disruptor fields activated around 300 Valdran cruisers. These ships suddenly found themselves trapped in temporal loops, experiencing the same 3 seconds over and over again. To outside observers, the ships appeared frozen in time, unable to move or act. To the crews inside, they were locked in an eternal moment, aware but helpless. "What's happening to our forces?" Krathvor demanded from the darkness of his powerless bridge. Emergency systems had restored minimal sensors, but what they showed was impossible. "Sir, we've lost contact with 300 ships. They're not responding. They're not destroyed, but they're not moving either. They're just stopped." The communications officer's voice cracked. "And there's something else. We're detecting nanite swarms approaching the outer fleet elements." General Nari watched from his command center as humanity's nanite weapons reached the first Valdran destroyers. These weren't crude machines. Each nanite was a quantum computer the size of a molecule, capable of disassembling matter at the atomic level and reassembling it into anything programmed into their databases. The Valdran destroyers began to come apart like sand castles in the tide. Their hulls dissolved into clouds of individual atoms which the nanites immediately began reorganizing. Within 90 seconds, each Valdrin destroyer had been converted into a new defensive satellite, adding to Earth's already overwhelming military infrastructure. Admiral Tejo watched from his position at the rear of the fleet as his fellow officers died or were disabled by weapons they couldn't understand or fight. He had tried to warn them. He had tried to make them listen. But Krathvor's arrogance had doomed them all. All ships, he transmitted on the fleet emergency channel. This is Admiral Tejo. Retreat immediately. We cannot win this battle. We cannot even fight this battle. Fall back before we're all destroyed. Some ships tried to obey, their captains finally understanding the truth. But the moment they attempted to activate their faster-than-light drives, they discovered Earth's final trap. Commander Minho, leading the Terran Space Force's First Fleet, watched as the Valdrin ships attempted to flee. His fleet had remained hidden until now. Thousands of human warships positioned throughout the solar system in the same dimensional hiding spaces the defensive platforms had used. Activate FTL interdiction, he ordered. Nobody leaves. Reality itself locked down across the entire solar system. Faster-than-light travel became impossible. Every FTL corridor sealed by fields that stabilized space-time into an unbreakable cage. The Valdrin fleet was trapped, unable to escape, unable to fight, unable to do anything but die or surrender. 4 minutes had passed since the first shot. 75% of the Valdrin fleet was gone. Destroyed, disabled, or converted into Earth's own defensive systems. The remaining ships drifted in space, their crews in shock. Minho opened a channel to every surviving Valdrin vessel. Valdrin forces, this is Commander Minho of the Terran Space Force. Your leadership chose violence against a peaceful world. Your empire has committed genocide across hundreds of systems. We could erase you all instantly, but we choose mercy. Power down your weapons and prepare to be detained. You will not be harmed. Resist and you will cease to exist. Choose now. On the powerless hulk of the Dominance, Krathvor listened to the human's offer and felt something he had never experienced before. Complete and utter defeat. His mighty fleet, the force that had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds, had been destroyed by a species he had called primitive, destroyed easily, casually, as if they were nothing more than annoying insects to be swatted aside. Some Valdrin captains surrendered immediately, powering down their weapons and accepting detention. They had seen enough. They knew when they were beaten. Others, driven by pride or fear of the Empire's punishment for failure, chose to continue fighting. These ships lasted exactly as long as it took Earth's defensive systems to target them. One moment they existed, filled with defiant warriors. The next moment they were gone, their crews transported via quantum teleportation to detention facilities orbiting Mars. Not a single human defender had been injured. Not one defensive platform had been damaged. Earth's shields hadn't even been tested to their full capacity. The entire battle lasted 11 minutes from first shot to final surrender. In the command center beneath the Swiss Alps, President Jiho watched the tactical display update with the final casualty counts. 0 human deaths, 0 human injuries, 473 Valdrin ships destroyed or disabled, 2 million aliens now in custody. It's over, General Nari said quietly. They never had a chance. No, Jiho replied. They didn't. Because we prepared for this day every single day for 7 decades. Because we took the threat seriously when they didn't even know we existed. He looked at the general. Make sure the prisoners are treated well. They're not our enemies anymore. They're victims of their own leadership's arrogance. Throughout the solar system, human ships began the process of collecting survivors and securing disabled vessels. The Valdrin Empire had come to conquer Earth. Instead, they had discovered that humanity was no longer prey. Humanity had become something far more dangerous. The throne room of the Valdrin Empire stretched across nearly half a kilometer of polished black stone. At its center sat Supreme Commander Krathvor, his massive form draped across a throne made from the hull of the first ship he ever destroyed. His forearms rested on the armrests, each one capable of crushing steel. His eyes, all 6 of them, scanned the holographic display floating before him. The display showed a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Earth, the primitive world was called. Such a simple name for what the reports claimed was a civilization barely capable of reaching its own moon. This is what you interrupt my victory celebration for? Krathvor's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. A backwater planet that still uses chemical propulsion? Intelligence Officer Vormak bowed low, his scales scraping against the floor. Supreme Commander, the planet shows signs of industrial civilization. Our scouts detected radio waves, primitive satellites, and evidence of nuclear capability. By galactic law, we must— Galactic law? Krathvor laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. We are the galactic law. For 3,000 years, the Valdran Empire has conquered 847 star systems. Not one species has ever successfully resisted us. Not one. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Tell me, Vormak, how long did it take us to crush the Keltorians? 14 hours, Supreme Commander. And they had plasma weapons and force fields. This Earth uses rockets that burn fuel. Krathvor waved one hand dismissively. They are insects. Less than insects. At the back of the throne room, a human figure stood quietly. Admiral Taiho had served the Valdran Empire for 23 years, ever since he left Earth as a young man seeking adventure among the stars. He had risen through the ranks through skill and ruthlessness, becoming one of the few non-Valdran to achieve high command. But now, hearing his homeworld discussed like prey, his stomach turned. Supreme Commander, Taiho stepped forward, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I request permission to speak. Krathvor's eyes fixed on him. Ah, the human. How appropriate. You will tell us about your primitive homeworld, yes? Convince us of their strength? His laughter echoed through the chamber, joined by the chittering and hissing of the assembled war council. Taiho ignored the mockery. The intelligence reports are based on radio transmissions captured 67 light-years from Earth. Those signals are over 60 years old. Human technology advances quickly. Very quickly. I recommend we send updated reconnaissance before committing forces. The laughter died. Krathvor's expression darkened. Are you suggesting, Admiral, that the mighty Valdran Empire should fear a species that only discovered electricity 200 years ago? I'm suggesting caution, Supreme Commander. Humans are unpredictable. We adapt, we innovate.
You grovel!
Krathvor slammed one massive fist onto his throne's armrest, cracking the metal. Is this the weakness all humans carry? Fear of their own shadow? He stood, his 3-meter frame towering over the assembled officers. I see now why your kind never built an empire. You lack the will to take what you want. Taiho's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with Krathvor only made things worse. The Supreme Commander turned to his war council. The 5th Conquest Fleet will depart within the cycle. 500 warships, 2 million soldiers, planet-cracking weapons. We will add this Earth to our empire, and we will do so with such overwhelming force that any other primitive worlds will see and tremble. He pointed at Taiho. You, human, will accompany the fleet as a rearguard commander. You will watch as we claim your homeworld in less time than it takes their sun to rise. Perhaps then you will learn what true strength means. The War Council erupted in approval, voices mixing in a cacophony of triumph. Vormak projected tactical displays across the room, showing the proposed invasion routes and target cities. Seoul, New York, Tokyo, London, Mumbai, major population centers that would be hit simultaneously, breaking human resistance before it could organize. The humans have approximately 7,000 nuclear warheads, Vormak explained, highlighting Earth's military installations, primitive fission and fusion devices. Our shields can withstand such attacks indefinitely. They have no energy weapons, no faster-than-light capability, and their largest spacecraft carries fewer than 10 individuals. Victory is assured. Taiho watched the displays with growing dread. The Valdran weren't wrong in their assessment based on the old data. When he had left Earth 2 decades ago, humanity was indeed limited to chemical rockets and early nuclear technology. But that was 20 years ago. 20 years of human development. 20 years during which he had lost contact with his homeworld, focusing on his career in an alien military. What if things had changed? He thought about human history, something the Valdran had never bothered to study. Humans had gone from the first airplane to landing on the moon in just 66 years. From the first computer to artificial intelligence in even less time. When humanity focused on a problem, especially a problem of survival, they advanced at speeds that made other species nervous. But surely, even humans couldn't advance that much in just 20 years. Could they? Krathvor was already dismissing the council, eager to begin preparations. The 5th Conquest Fleet would be ready to depart in 3 days. The journey to Earth would take another week through faster-than-light corridors. In 10 days, the invasion would begin. Taiho left the throne room and made his way to his quarters. The corridor outside was filled with celebrating officers, already counting the spoils from a planet they hadn't even reached yet. He ignored them all, his mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. He had tried to warn them. He had done his duty, but Krathvor was right about one thing. Taiho didn't know what Earth was truly capable of now. He had been gone too long. The radio signals the Valdrin intercepted were ancient by human standards. Anything could have happened in the intervening decades. As he entered his quarters and sealed the door behind him, Taiho made a decision. He would request a private communication channel with Earth before the fleet arrived. He would try to warn them, give them time to prepare or evacuate. It was a betrayal of the empire he served, but he was still human and Earth was still his home. He reached for his communication console, then stopped. The room's security system would detect and report any unauthorized transmissions. Krathvor would learn of it immediately, and Taiho would be executed as a traitor before the fleet even departed. He pulled his hand back, frustrated and helpless. All he could do now was wait and hope. Hope that the Valdrin were right and Earth was still primitive, or hope that the Valdrin were terribly, catastrophically wrong, and that humanity had become something far more dangerous than anyone realized. In 3 days, the fleet would depart. In 10 days, they would have their answer. Taiho sat in the darkness of his quarters and wondered which outcome he should actually be hoping for. The Valdrin 5th Conquest Fleet tore through the fabric of spacetime and emerged at the edge of Earth's solar system with all the subtlety of a thunderclap. 500 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the distant light of the sun. The largest vessels stretched over 2 kilometers in length, bristling with weapons that could reduce mountains to dust. On the bridge of the flagship Dominance, Krathvor settled into his command throne with satisfaction. Scan the system. Show me their pathetic defenses. The sensor officer's claws danced across his console. A moment later, his confident posture faltered. Supreme Commander, There's something wrong with the readings. Wrong? Krathvor leaned forward. Define wrong. The planet is surrounded by thousands of structures. Energy signatures they're massive, Supreme Commander. Each one outputs more power than our flagship's main reactor. The bridge fell silent. Krathvor's eyes narrowed to slits. Check your sensors. They must be malfunctioning. I've run 3 diagnostics, Supreme Commander. All systems are functioning perfectly. The readings are accurate. Krathvor rose from his throne and approached the main display. What he saw made his blood run cold for just a moment before rage replaced the fear. The primitive planet that should have been defended by perhaps a few orbital stations was instead encased in a complete defensive sphere. Thousands of platforms, each one larger than his heavy cruisers, orbited in perfect synchronization. This is impossible, he growled. The report said they were primitive. At the rear of the fleet, Admiral Taiho stood on the bridge of his assigned cruiser, watching the same sensor data. His stomach dropped. He had hoped to be wrong. He had hoped Earth was still the vulnerable world he remembered. But this was something else entirely. They've been hiding, he whispered. All this time they've been hiding their real strength. On Earth, 50,000 kilometers below the orbital platforms, Captain Hana sat calmly in her command chair, aboard Orbital Defense Platform Aegis 7. Her screen showed the Valdrin fleet in perfect detail. Every ship cataloged and analyzed by systems that could count the rivets on their hulls from 1,000,000 kilometers away. Standard first contact protocol, she ordered. Her communications officer nodded and activated the transmission array. The message that reached the Valdrin fleet was broadcast in 4,000 languages, including Valdrin. It carried no threat, only a simple question and warning. Unknown vessels, you have entered the territory of the United Terran Defense Zone. State your intentions immediately. You have 10 minutes to respond. Failure to respond will be interpreted as hostile intent. Krathvor listened to the message, his rage building with each word. These insects dared to issue him ultimatums. Him, who had conquered entire civilizations. Send them our standard conquest demand, he ordered. They will surrender within 10 minutes or face annihilation. The communications officer hesitated. Supreme Commander, perhaps we should... Now. The message was sent. Krathvor's demand was simple and brutal. Immediate unconditional surrender, tribute of all resources, and submission to Valdrin imperial authority. He gave Earth the same 10 minutes they had given him. On Aegis 7, Captain Hana read the demand without expression. She had expected nothing less. The Valdrin Empire had a reputation that preceded them across the galaxy, but Earth had been monitoring that reputation for over 80 years, ever since they first detected the Empire's expansion pattern through deep space telescopes. "Send the alert," she said quietly. "Activation level, Omega." Across the solar system, from Mercury to Neptune, defensive systems began powering up. But these weren't the systems the Valdrin could see. Those visible platforms and satellites were real enough, but they were also decoys. The real defenses existed in places the Valdrin hadn't thought to look. On Earth, in a command center buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, President Jiho walked into the emergency council chamber. The room was already full of military commanders and scientific advisors, their faces grim but determined. General Nari, commander of Earth's military forces, stood at the main tactical display. "Mr. President, the Valdrin fleet has issued a conquest demand. They've given us 10 minutes to surrender." Jiho looked at the display showing the alien fleet. 500 warships, 2 million soldiers, weapons capable of cracking planets, a force that had never been defeated in 3,000 years. "And our status?" he asked. "All defensive systems are ready. We've been ready for 73 years, sir. The moment we detected the Valdrin Empire's expansion pattern, we began preparing for this possibility." General Nari's expression was hard. "They think we're primitive because they intercepted radio signals from 60 years ago. They have no idea what we've actually become." President Jiho had been a quantum physicist before entering politics. He understood better than most what humanity had achieved in the darkness of hidden laboratories and underground research facilities. While the world above appeared to advance normally, beneath the surface humanity had experienced a technological revolution that would have seemed like magic to their grandparents. "Show me the real defenses," he said. General Nari entered a command. The display changed, revealing layers upon layers of defensive systems the Valdrin couldn't detect. Quantum battle stations existing partially in other dimensions, singularity weapons that could create and control black holes, nanite swarms capable of dismantling matter at the atomic level, probability shields that weaponized quantum uncertainty itself. "How much time?" Jiho asked. 4 minutes until their deadline expires," General Nari replied. "They've begun advancing in combat formation. They're targeting our major cities." Jiho looked around the room at the assembled commanders and advisors. These were good people, intelligent people, who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity. They had built these defenses hoping they would never need them. They had kept the secret from the public to avoid mass panic. They had waited and watched as the Valdrin Empire carved through the galaxy, always wondering if Earth would be next. Now that moment had arrived. "We did everything we could to avoid this," Jiho said quietly. "We offered them peace. We gave them a chance to leave. They chose violence against a world that wanted nothing but to be left alone." He straightened his shoulders. "General Nari, you have authorization to activate Horizon Defense. Protect our world." "Yes, Mr. President." General Nari turned to his command staff. "Activate Horizon Defense. Full deployment. Show them what humanity has really built." Back in space, Krathvor watched his countdown timer reach 0. The humans had not responded to his demands. Very well. They would learn the price of defiance. "All ships," he commanded, his voice carrying to every vessel in the fleet. "Weapons free. Commence planetary bombardment. Turn their cities to ash." 500 Valdrin warships powered up their main weapons. Energy signatures spiked across every spectrum as antimatter torpedoes and plasma cannons charged to full power. This was the moment when most civilizations broke, when they saw the true scale of Valdrin might and surrendered in terror. But Earth did not surrender. Earth did not even seem to notice. Instead, the space around the planet began to shimmer. Reality itself seemed to ripple and fold. And then, as the Valdrin fleet fired its first devastating salvo, something impossible happened. Massive structures phased into existence throughout the solar system. They had been there all along, hidden in dimensions the Valdrin didn't know existed. And now, as thousands of antimatter torpedoes streaked toward Earth, these structures activated. Captain Hana watched on her display as every single torpedo simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not deflected, but erased from reality itself by probability shields that decided the weapons had never been fired at all. She opened a channel to the Valdran fleet, her voice calm and professional. You have attacked a sovereign world without provocation. You have threatened billions of innocent lives. You have one chance. Surrender immediately or face erasure. On the bridge of the Dominance, Krathvor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His weapons had simply vanished. Impossible. Nothing could stop that much firepower. Nothing. Fire everything, he roared. Destroy them. Destroy them all. Captain Hana's expression didn't change. She had tried to give them a chance. They had refused. Activate countermeasures, she ordered. Remove the threat. And with those words, humanity finally revealed what they had truly become.